The LCS summer split is over, and we are ready for playoffs. This week, we get into a few different topics. One of them being how good is EG without Inspired? When we get to that topic, I'll explain where that came from. And when we get into each team this week, we're going to do each team's MVP for the split. Rather than just talk about who's the obvious MVP for the league is, we'll get into who we think the best performer is for the split of each team. And of course, we do our all-pro voting. Of course, J&T and I, our vote doesn't count, but we like to do it anyways just for funsies. So we will be doing that. Episode 96 of the Clown Fiesta podcast starts now with Blue Jay and J&T 250. J&T, overall split, what do you think?
It was pretty good. I think I felt like it would have been a pretty boring split if not for the rise and fall of both CLG and TSM. I guess the fall of TSM sort of carries over from last split, but even with the roster changes that they made, people still expected, or at least had predicted TSM to be somewhere within the top 6. While they did finish 7th, they were clearly a step below all the teams above them, and, in my opinion, are closer to the bottom of the standings than the top of the standings. Like, just even
not everyone predicted them top 6.
Well,
do you remember the Mark Z thing?
Well, I don't, but I remember I didn't. So
no.
But I mean, there was some expectation when you bring in a player like Maple to sort of kind of turn your team around.
True. But the other thing too is, and I guess you can't really say for sure that you should expect so many roster swaps. It is TSM after all, so maybe you should. But I don't think the thing is when it came to predicting TSM, it was so unpredictable because of what the year had been already for them anyways. So predicting how TSM would finish was probably one of the toughest things ever. But the Mark Z thing that I'm referring to was there was the interview with Travis that Spica did where he got mad that Mark Z predicted them 7th. And he was like, he should lose his job. And then they ended up finishing 7th anyway. So it was kind of funny. But yeah, anyways, we'll get into all the TSM stuff, everyone, honestly. We'll do a quick little wrap up when we talk about each team's best player. Let's start off with the all-pro voting. As you mentioned earlier to me, like, not so obvious this time around. Of course, some roles are pretty obvious, but not so obvious as far as like what all the voting should look like. So I assume you're just going to pull them up on stream?
Yep.
On the screen there? Yep.
Just want to point out, though, even though that our vote doesn't count, I would say that our votes carry a little bit more weight than half the media votes. If you want a good laugh for people who like truly care about the all-pro voting and all the voting for the post-split awards, if you go and read the actual, like, all the ballots for the voting, some of it is, like, honestly a joke. So
I'm just, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. There's sometimes where it makes you wonder if the people that are voting actually watched the games. So yeah. But anyways.
Well, here, I'll read them out just for so that
go ahead and read them out for the audio listeners. I haven't seen J&T's picks yet, so I'm kind of in between. I'm reading them as we're going. So go ahead, J&T, and read them out loud.
Yeah, so for myself, my first team, I had Someday, Inspired, Jojapune, Danny, and Huhi. My second team, I had Bwipo, Closer, Abadage, Berserker, and Vulcan. And third team, I had Dokla, Santorin, Bjergsen, FBI, and Aframu. On Blue Jay's side, he had on his first team Someday, Inspired, Abadage, Danny, Vulcan. Second team was Bwipo, Closer, Bjergsen, FBI, Aframu. Third team, Impact, Santorin, Takui, Berserker, and Huhi. I think just initial things to point out. We agreed on the junglers. 1 Inspired, 2 Closer, 3 Santorin. That to me is pretty clear cut, and I don't think there's a lot of room for debate within this. We kind of alluded to it at the beginning, but Inspired is the odds-on MVP favorite, and after his, just this past weekend in the LCS, pretty much like definitively made his stamp that he will be the MVP. I know a lot of people wanted to talk about Someday potentially being the MVP, and I feel like that was mainly being talked about because Someday was making these kind of flashy solo kill plays happen in the top lane, which, don't get me wrong, is impressive, especially in these like jank tank v tank matchups where solo kills shouldn't really happen. And should you be getting solo kills in those kinds of matchups, it's obviously a testament of your knowledge of the matchup and you being a great player and all. But to me, it just felt like everybody forgot how well Inspired was doing and how hard he was kind of carrying EG. And I feel like just this past weekend, he reminded everybody that he's the MVP and obviously is the first team all-pro jungler.
Yeah, Yeah, there was no doubt there. And the funny thing about the someday thing is like, as you and I have said many times, like I'm so surprised about the push this split for him to be MVP. Whereas like I would feel like his bid for MVP last split would have been better. Now, of course, remind people that Summit was absolutely popping off as well, and so I wasn't surprised at all that Summit won the MVP. But to me, like I felt like Inspired was the clear favorite this time around more than Someday than like Summit was of Someday last split, but that was just my opinion because I thought Someday had an amazing spring split. Um, but yeah, I mean that what more can you say? I don't know. He's had a really good year, I guess, is the way you could put it for Someday.
Yeah, and then I guess the other thing to be said is for our bot lanes, we had the same three people, however, just in various orders. We both had Danny 1, and then we had Berserker and FBI 2 and 3. We swapped them around. Support, you had Vulcan 1, I had Huhi 1, and you'd have Aphromo 2, I had him 3, and I had Vulcan 2nd.
Yeah. The one thing that I feel like I'm probably going to get flamed for here, so I may as well just go out and with it, is I don't have Jojo Pion on my list here. I really, really struggled with the mid laners in this one because I didn't feel like any of them, whether it be Abadage, Bjergsen, Takoi, or Jojo, stood out way more above the others. I know the community sentiment is that Jojo Pion is supposed to be one of the best players in the league. I personally don't think he's there yet. I think there's still a lot of errors because he plays so aggressive, which is a good thing, by the way. I think the aggressive playstyle is a very good thing, but you get a lot of hiccups with it too. Especially and my main criticism has continued to be that he will overextend in side lanes, and that's something that we haven't really seen slow down. But I don't know, like I could have easily put him 1 and then pushed them all back 1. I could have swapped them all around. I really, really struggled with those 4. I thought Abadage, even though he had a slow start, had such a good middle and end to the split that I just couldn't ignore it. And I went back and forth in my head about, am I being too recent? Like, is there too much recency bias here? And I honestly, I just don't think so. He absolutely styled on the league for the last, I don't even know, 5-6 weeks, whatever it was. Whereas if he continued to play like that, I think there would be a lot bigger of discussion for who the MVP was between him and Inspired if he didn't have such a slow start. So I don't feel bad for my mid lane list, but I do know there's going to be a lot of people that they're going to look at that and flame the shit out of it and whatever. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I think that mid lane was very up for grabs. I think it's kind of up to interpretation. It is whatever qualities you feel most important about within the mid lane role, specifically this go around. It was going to be more of your sort of personal bias and opinion because there was no, in my opinion, clear cut 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 5. I think, this is the part of the reason why I think that the voting is going to be funny this time around. Not because of what I was saying about the media people beforehand, but mid lane specifically, I feel like you're going to get a wide range of votes because even though we have only listed on our own lists Jojo, Abadage, Bjergsen, and Takui, I feel like Jensen might get some votes thrown at him. I mean, not mainly just because he's Jensen. He obviously wasn't playing that well in the beginning of the split, but I think had a pretty good second half to finish it out. He had a couple poor games. The ones that come to mind is like that one Yone game against CLG, and even his LeBlanc game against EG wasn't that great. But for the most part, Jensen's been pretty consistent and one of the, I would say, better performers on Cloud9 in terms of consistency because that roster has been really up and down the entire split. The only person on C9 that we have in this list is Berserker. And I think that's mainly just a testament to how good he is and how few mistakes that he makes in general. To me, he'd probably be 1, if not for the strength of Danny and EG. I think it's hard to even say because I think Danny just belongs there because he's clearly the best. He's the best performing ADC right now. But I think that
hands down for me.
I think
not even close.
I would say if Cloud9 had a proper offseason, I think Berserker would definitely be up more in that conversation. The main thing that I sort of one of the reasons why I had FBI up there and third specifically and not second is I just think that the mechanics and the just the raw gameplay of Danny and Berserker are just so much higher than the rest of the league. And that's not to say that FBI is terrible or anything. One of the things that I think FBI and Huhi specifically, and one of the reasons why I had Huhi actually number 1 on my support list, is their versatility in the bot lane. They're pretty much the only team, along with Golden Guardians, that was running these various Senna X bot lanes. I think from 100 Thieves, we saw Senna Yasuo, we saw Senna Sejuani, we saw Senna Seraphine. Even last split, we saw like Senna Lee Sin, or if it wasn't last split, maybe it was Summer. But FBI and Hui have proven to be one of the most versatile bot lanes in the league, and I do think that their performance ramped up over the course of the split, which is my main reason for having
For
Hui
sure.
as number one, because he specifically, I think, is the one that brings the versatility to this team, because he even played the Mundo center. I totally forgot about that. But the Mundo bot lane, like he I think it was against Golden Guardians, completely shit stomped them
Wait, wait,
1v9
wait,
in
wait,
that
wait,
game.
wait. He did that? I thought that was Ole that played it. No?
Well, I think he
Did they
also,
both play that?
I think they both played it. Maybe
Oh.
maybe I'm thinking of when Ole played it against somebody else, but I know who he also played it. They ran a lot of the Senate X bot lanes, which I think is really good, and he had one of the most wide champion pools of all the supports. I want to pull it up again, looking at the numbers, but I think in the 18 games to split, he had like 11 or 12 unique champions. One, two, three, four, five. He had five. He had 13 unique champions in 18 games, which I thought
Yeah,
was
that is
pretty
crazy.
impressive.
I completely agree with you when it comes to how they ramped up as the split went on. I remember being very worried about FBI's positioning when it came to honestly a lot of the 100 Thieves players, their positioning, because even at the start of the split I mentioned Abadage was struggling, is because he took like really weird pathing back to his lane whenever he was like getting blues or whatever, whether it be even roaming topside, he would roam like right into the jungler and like not check brushes, things of that nature. And then FBI, same kind of deal. And so, like, the positioning was something that I really, really focused on when I was watching 100 Thieves this split. And they got so much better with it. And so I was able to confidently push FBI to the 2 spot because I thought his team fight positioning specifically was so, so good. Putting out a bunch of damage, which I mean, that's what you want, right? What else can you ask for? So I felt pretty comfortable pushing him up to number 2. Berserker had some really good pop off moments. I just felt like they were too few and far between for me to push him higher on this list. Still a great split from him, but yeah, I guess I just thought FBI was a little bit better.
Yeah, I think it was really close. I mean, the main thing, the main thing with the ADCs is I feel like these are the three ADCs that should be here, and Danny should be number one. And I don't have any complaints with Berserker or FBI being two or three, partially because I think they serve different roles within their teams, and for the most part, I would say that Berserker was being even hindered a little bit by the rest of Cloud9, whereas I think FBI
And I think
was
that's
getting
fair.
a bit boosted from the
Cloud9
rest of his
was
performances on 100T. Because I mean, not to say that. I mean, I'm gonna
boosted.
say that I think FBI was probably the weakest performer on his team on an individual level, but that doesn't mean he's bad or anything. I just think that you could clearly see 100 Thieves ramping up the entire split. Sunday was the clear cut first team All Pro top laner. That's not a question. Abadage, to what you mentioned right at the beginning, should the split have gone on a little bit longer maybe, and he would have had a few more games of his current performance because he had such a weak start but a very very strong middle and end. He could have easily been number one on my list. Closer is obviously a beast on this team. In most other splits, probably would be number one if not for Inspired. Just I don't know, like smurfing almost every other game. And I just talked about how great I think who he was this split. So not to flame FBI, but I just think the rest of 100 Thieves is just doing so well this split, and I would think that's kind of the opposite for Berserker in this case.
I know you're not literally saying he's boosted, but I still think the boosted terminology is a little bit funny.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's interesting that you bring up the worst player on that team thing, not because I like how could you say that, but because I don't know who I would pick for that. I feel like, and that honestly speaks to 100 Thieves looking so solid right now. I know a lot of people are going to look at this weekend and be like, they lost a FlyQuest and they could have lost a TL. I didn't think their weekend was that bad, to be honest. We'll get into them in a sec, but I guess I just think the team looks solid top to bottom. So that's a really good problem to have, not being able to figure out who your worst player is because they all look good. That's the way I would classify 100 Thieves right now. Anyways, nothing terrible from the rest of the list that like when I look at your list, there's nothing else that's too crazy to me. The only thing is I couldn't put Dokla on the list because I do felt like he really struggled towards the end. And again, maybe some recency bias. I thought he really struggled this weekend.
Yeah,
Not to say, I
he
mean, it's
didn't
a
have a
whole
great
split
weekend.
award. He had a rough
He
weekend, but I don't like.
got put in the dirt a little
I
bit.
don't want to look at one weekend and be like, how can you have him on your list? It's like, he still had a pretty good split overall, so I don't mind Dokla being third either.
Yeah, the main
I struggled with the top lane because I didn't think that we had a third. I don't think we have a third top lane all pro, honestly, because I don't think Impact was really all that deserving of it. I didn't think Dokla was, and I didn't think anybody else was. I think top lane is easily our worst role right now in the LCS. I know I said that about a month ago. I'm going back to that. I think the top lane is definitely the weakest.
Yeah, and the main reason partially why I think Someday was obviously, the clear cut number one, and I didn't even consider anybody else for even 1 second, and that's obviously because of this play. But I think specifically this split, you look at all the top laners, and there was just like a ton of different pros and cons. Like every single top laner this split felt to me like they had an equal number of pros and cons. Bwipo, even though I think he ended up second, honestly, I don't think he was like playing at the level of like a second all pro top laner. He was a very strong laner and honestly wasn't team fighting very, very well. And you kind of saw like that was Bwipo's style a bit. This split was strong laner, lane dominant picks, not so great at team fighting. Dokla, really, really strong in the 1v1, very good at laning, but wasn't really playing the map too well in some of these games, getting picked off in side lanes. Fudge, horrible laning phase, great team fighting, was often picking a lot of, late game scaling champions and, was losing his lanes, but I think losing a little bit more than you should because he did have some instances where he was getting, solo killed in the top lane or, he was, not working too well with his pressure top side and dying on stacked waves. Even players like I guess Impact is the other one to focus. I just don't think that he was very dominant, or I don't mean in the same respect. I don't think he was very bad. I just think that he was just kind of neutral, and
Yeah, I agree.
maybe that's part of the reason why I had Dokla on there, not Impact, because I think I've said this in the past that I do value a player who is you know is doing a lot within his own lane, whether that's helping or hindering the team. And I think in part, I mean, not to go back to one specific instance, but remember that Fiora game like 3 weeks ago from CLG where he was just like absolutely smurfing like in the 1v1 and like trying to outplay 1v2s 1v3s and was just getting no help at all. Like I feel like
I
in
do.
some
Yeah,
I feel
remember
I
that.
do feel like in some of these games, like if Dokla is getting more topside pressure with the style of play that he's doing, the picks he's playing, played a lot of Fiora, played a lot of Yone, I feel like maybe he wouldn't have had as many of those int moments. But I mean, how can you really say?
Yeah. That's it for me, I think, as far as the list. I don't really have any other thoughts. Do you?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, I want to before we move on to the teams, before we talk about all of them, I do want to remind people to hit the subscribe button if you are new to the channel and you are enjoying the content. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Twitch. Just look for the Clown Fiesta podcast and you will be able to find us on there. Also, haven't plugged our Discord in a long time. So we do have a Discord. You could find it. I think it's usually in the description, right, JNT,
Yep.
of the like YouTube?
Yep.
Yeah, so you could find it there. And like if ever people want to reach out to us on Discord or recommend certain topics or anything like that, feel free to do so. Um it's not really all that active because we haven't really plugged it in, I don't know, forever, but we do reach out to people or communicate with people, I guess. So feel free to do that. And yeah, that's it. So let's move on to the teams now. Let's talk about the teams that are getting their first round buys. For this week, we're going, like I mentioned at the start of the show, we're going to do the MVP for each team. Because I don't think that gets highlighted enough. Sometimes there is a player that is really like, dragging their team across the line. And so maybe we can highlight those players. Let's start with who we starting with, 100 Thieves or EG?
Yeah, I feel like our MVP for these two teams are we kind of. I feel like it's a bit obvious that they are based on our All Pro discussions. We'll start with EG. Obviously, they're the number one seed. But honestly, 100 Thieves kind of fumbling the bag a little bit. I even mentioned this last week in our episode that 100 Thieves had the chance to tiebreak EG for first place should they get the 3-0 weekend. And unfortunately, they lost a FlyQuest on, I think it was Friday, in their first match of the Super Week,
Yeah.
which kind of doomed their chances at the number one seed and made that Sunday match against Team Liquid all the more important to not have to play a tiebreaker for second place. But EG, they got the 3-0. Inspired obviously was a monster. I feel like that highlight on Vi against Cloud9 is going to be one of the ones that is very prominent in his MVP video or whatever award, presentation, whatever you want to call it. kind of flashbacks that inspired the pentakill that he got on Rogue against Misfits in that game 5 to send them further in the playoffs. Basically, wasn't playoffs, so it didn't really matter, but just confirmed that they were going to be the #1 seed. So it's hard to fault
He
EG.
had
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say he had the MVP before that play, and then was just like, "Oh, by the way, yeah, I am taking this MVP with that play." Like the games this weekend from EG weren't anything too crazy. Like the first couple, like Golden Guardians. Actually, Golden Guardians didn't even play that bad against EG, but like that one was still like a match you knew they were gonna win. Then they played Dig, you knew they were gonna win that. The C9 one was one where like EG was kind of outplaying them the most of the game, but for some reason weren't really getting a gold lead. And then they kind of started throwing, and then Inspired was like, "Don't worry, guys, I got this." And then obviously had the triple kill that everyone is that's going to be in some montages for the next little while to come. And that's where it's like, okay, yep, MVP's done. This discussion doesn't need to go anywhere. We mentioned how there were some people calling for Someday to get some MVP votes. I don't know how you could still want him to be the MVP after even that play. Like that game specifically. That game was dragged over the line by Inspired, right? And that's where people started mentioning that like Inspired is where the success of EG comes from. And listening to the co-streams this weekend, or watching the co-streams, Doublelift was mentioning how like Inspired continues to like run the games in Champions Queue when they play. Like he's really, really impressed with how like he's able to manage all the different lanes. And that's what kind of made me start thinking like, how good is EG without him, right? And we don't know the answer to that. We'll never see. Like it's a hypothetical. But I do think it's a fair question to ask. Like, just how much do you think, JNT, that this team is #1 because of Inspired? Let's say they have like an average jungler. Where do you think they finish, and what do you think their record would be?
It, it's difficult to say, especially with the way that he performed this split. So I try to sort of think back to more of his last split performances and even some of his time on Rogue, because he was such an integral part of that team. And I think you take EG off of this team, and I think the main area where they would be lacking is their stability in the early game. Because I've talked about many times over the course of this split, EG's formula for winning games has been have a stable early game, get some scaling lanes. Presumably it's JoJo and Danny who are picking these scaling champions. Get to 20 minutes at an even game state, and you're probably just going to win the game because you're better team fighters and you're better at controlling objectives. And I think that could maybe go off the rails. I don't know, but from what we do know, Inspired seems to be the one who is coordinating a lot with the team in the early game. He's probably part of the reason why EG is able to keep these neutral and stable lanes like they do, with Inspired, willing to help out whenever needed, and just gives the team the ability to get into the late game where they can let their carry shine. And we've even seen from Inspired, he can also be the carry. So I feel like you take Inspired off of EG, they're probably still near the top of the standings. I mean, but they're definitely not 1. They may be 2, 3, or 4. I would say you take Inspired off of EG this split, they're probably not as good as 100 Thieves. And maybe they're in the ballpark with CLG and Team Liquid.
Yeah, I would probably put them around 4th, honestly. So some things that you said I agree with, mostly that he runs the early game. He ganks a lot and gets a lot of advantages for the lane. And the stuff that I agree with you is that like the blueprint for this team is get through the early game and let Danny go nuts is pretty much how the late game goes, right? The 2 players to me that carry this team are Inspired and Danny mostly, and that's no shot to the other players. I just think the real big standouts are those 2.
Yep.
But most of the early game is Inspired and most of the late game is Danny. And now I don't want to discount, like, I think JoJo actually roams a lot in the early game and he makes a lot happen as well. But I think the solid majority comes from Inspired. And I think that's why we're seeing them look so good. I probably would say that they're maybe 11-7, maybe somewhere around there, sitting around 4th. And I think that says a lot about a player where, like, and again, this is all hypothetical. We don't know what their record would look like, but right now they're 15-3. That is a really, really good split. And I think that would be a really big difference, a 4-win difference from one player. So yeah, anyways, the point being that I think this team is massively, massively improved because of the Inspired signing. And yeah, I guess he's a beast. What more can I say?
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely like I mean, I'm just guessing here, but 15 wins in a split sounds to me like that's quite above average. I would assume that the first place team is somewhere in the ballpark of 13 wins. On average, the first place team ends up somewhere around 13 wins. That would be 13-5. I would say that number feels like a decent average. And, for the most part, whenever teams are 14 or plus wins, that usually means that first place team has been fairly dominant. You look at examples in the past. You have, TSM's, or you had no, TSM didn't go 18, bro. No, they didn't. But multiple
No, they
times
went
we've seen
17-1,
yeah,
right?
they like TSM won 17-1, Immortals won 17-1, Cloud9 won 17-1. I don't even think every team has ever finished 16-2 because I can't think of one. But
Yeah, I don't think so either.
15-3. I
don't think
know
so.
like Team Liquid had that in spring of 2021. Um, Cloud9 has had it a couple times before, but for the most part, you look at those 14 plus team wins, and those are the teams when you think of like the dominant Cloud9 days, the dominant TL days, and the dominant TSM days. And EG
Yeah.
looks like that kind of a team right now. And I guess for me, it's all about, I guess I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but looking towards the future, keeping this team around, I think could be a pretty dominant team in the LCS. And Inspired is the main person who needs to be on that team to continue to do so.
Yeah, and the thing is, when it comes to like, there's still so much room for improvement because JoJo and Danny are still like they're fresh, right?
Like
Like
they can get even
these are guys
better.
that have not
Like
exactly.
we have
That's one of
Danny
the
as
like
all pro number one. Like he could be better. We don't know.
yeah, it's crazy to think, but yeah, um, they are looking very very good, and it's looking like they are the favorite. We mentioned last week that like 100 Thieves may have caught them, and while I do think there's some truth to that still, they're definitely holding their own in the number one spot at the moment.
Yeah, I mean,
When it comes to 100 Thieves, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, unfortunately, from the 100 Thieves like side, they kind of robbed themselves of the opportunity to prove themselves as the number one team. Because, like I said, if they would have beaten FlyQuest on Friday, they would have been playing a tiebreaker for first place, and that would have probably given everybody the answer to who is the better team going into playoffs. So, while EG is one and 100 Thieves is two, I don't necessarily think that EG is the definitive number one. I think that we're
Yeah, I
still
agree.
we're still in the ballpark of a coin toss if you were to put these two teams in a best of five right now, especially with the way that 100 Thieves is performing individually across the board. For me, I had all five of their players on my All Pro list. I had three of them as the number one, and I had, or no, sorry, 100 Thieves. I had all five of them with Someday one, a bunch of them in two, and then one of them in three. So on the EG side, I didn't have Impact up there. I mean, that's not super relevant, but if you were to pick a mismatch in that matchup, it would be in the top lane for sure.
Yeah, and when it comes to to 100 Thieves, like quote unquote choking this weekend, I don't really buy it. Same way that like when EG got clapped by TL, I wasn't like, oh no, it's all over for EG. It's like, no, it's just one game, things like that happen. I don't know. Here's what I'll say about 100 Thieves, and I guess you could maybe classify this as a weakness, but I hate when closer is put on like Trundle duty, for example. I don't want closer on any kind of duty. Like, let that guy either carry or let him have a playmaker. Like, Trundle is so like not the champion I want him playing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what I feel like
So
when
that
Cloud9 puts Blabber on Viego. Like, don't I hate it when Cloud9 picks Viego. It's so horrible. It's like the complete anti-Blabber champion.
I just felt like in the game against FlyQuest, I didn't really know what 100 Thieves was supposed to do to try to lock someone down. I don't remember what the whole draft was, but I remember thinking like they're gonna have such a hard time trying to catch like LeBlanc, or like you had Sivers got Spell Shield and a Lulu. Like it's just it felt like there was no real good engage. I think they just had Gnar to engage, but like if you see the Gnar trying to run at you, you could kind of just polymorph them and then go XD. And then even if the polymorph doesn't last long enough, you still have the spell shield. Like, I don't know. It felt like there was no way of getting on top of FlyQuest, and FlyQuest just played out their comp really, really well. So to me, it wasn't like, oh, 100 Thieves played so bad. The game against TL, that's one where I just got to give credit to TL for the early game. Like Santorin was an absolute monster, and he's back to his heavy gank and get so many advantages early. So like I don't know, I didn't really have any problems with that. And even from behind, I can't. I can't completely ignore TL's inability to find fights when they're ahead, but I still have to give credit to 100 Thieves for kiting out those fights when they have like the Seraphine, for example, and just sustaining them and then re-engaging. Like really, really well played against TL, the team fights for 100 Thieves there. So yeah, they could have lost 2 games this weekend, but they didn't. And I thought they played pretty well for the most part. So not too worried for 100 Thieves.
Yeah, and I think to sort of get back a little bit to that game against Team Liquid, like part of it had to do with like the draft sort of, and not to always be like we're not the type of people to just say draft diff, but you look at the 100 Thieves comp and look at the champions, like they'll just reach a certain point into the game where they just start outperforming the opposing champion on the other side like exponentially. Like they had Senna Seraphine bot lane, like ultimate scaling bot lane. Gwen top, like that champion is disgusting. Don't know how or why it's still getting picked. I don't say why, but like I don't know why it's just getting. It's falling to the draft almost every single game, which I really don't understand at all because it seems to be the clear cut best top in the league. And I mean, like Gwen on 2 items is just ridiculously disgusting. And even with like Wukong, best team fighting jungler, and then Talia, one of the best champions in the mid and late game in terms of controlling objectives and even controlling like sieges and like wave management and stuff with their wall. So to me, it was kind of just like a matter of time before 100 Thieves ended up winning, and it was more on Team Liquid to push the pace. And you could see them trying to push the pace, but in the course of doing that, you could see them fumble a lot of their executions, especially around 20 to 25 minutes, where unfortunately for Core JJ, he was a bit of a stinky Amumu player that game.
Yeah, last thing I'll say, because I do want to transition over to TL. Last thing I'll say on 100 Thieves is just Someday the best player. That's their MVP. I don't need to add anymore.
We kind of said it already.
Yeah, exactly. So let's transition over to TL because you mentioned Core JJ and the Amumu. He had a good start with the Amumu. The laning phase was great. I mean, and that's the thing, right? When you have 2 bandage tosses, like that's one of the reasons why we started to see Amumu in the bot lane, or in support rather, because you can just engage really, really easily. Later on, he had a really hard time engaging fights, and like I said, 100 Thieves would just kite them out, and well, yeah, I guess they struggled after that. And the thing is, we theorized this maybe a month or maybe it was at the start of the split actually, that one of the biggest issues with TL is they struggle when Core JJ isn't on the engaged champions. And I feel a lot more confident in saying now, because I also talked with Whippo on Hotline League a couple weeks ago, asking him if there was anything consistent that he's noticing that's like an issue for TL, and he didn't really answer the question because I don't know, for reasons I guess. But I feel confident now that the consistent thing is that even though they're getting so many huge early game leads, they cannot find those engages. And even before, I thought it was because Core JJ just wasn't playing engaged champions. Even when he is, he's not finding them. And so it's like it's a really big like downer of a split for Core JJ. I still wouldn't even say it's a horrendous split, but it's not the Core JJ that we've come to know. And I wouldn't even lay it all on his shoulders. Even when you see like Bjergsen in lane, like Bjergsen was smashing Abadage with the Azir in lane, right? He was like summoning sand soldiers in Abadage's ass in lane. He was crushing them. But then every time you see, like for the last couple of weeks, Bjergsen goes to make an engage and you use a Shurima shuffle, he misses. And it's like, it's just when it comes to those clutch moments to make the engage happen, they're just not getting it. And so I don't know, they got to find someone who's going to be able to use the go button and use it with success. That's the issue right now, is they can't find their fights.
Yeah, and I do think, I mean, I mentioned it a little bit before, and even in this game, you kind of saw it with Whippo. Like, his laning was great on the Aatrox, but his team fighting was also just, like, horrendous. It was, I mean, once again, I won't talk about the draft too much, but it did feel like the TL draft had some kind of, like, inconsistencies in it a little bit because, Azir and Sivir are kind of these 2 champions that, for the most part, want to sit back and be able to deal their damage from a long distance. But at the same time, they have this Aatrox, Skarner, and Amumu who want to be diving onto your face and disrupting the backline. And, I think that was kind of one of the reasons why Bjergsen's engages, specifically in this game, weren't very good, is because you could see that he had to go in extra deep to try to even find these shuffles. And sometimes when they're not even there, and, Hans Sama, for the most part, this game, while he did kind of end up with a good KDA of 8-3-3, like, he just wasn't able to do a whole lot because he's not really like Sivir is not a champion who can really follow up on these engages super hard. And you kind of see at a certain point TL would engage, their engage would mess up, and Hansama's just kind of forced to retreat because I mean if he walks up he's gonna die. So what are you supposed to do at that point?
It's so hard when you're getting kited by like the Senna and Seraphine, right? They
Yeah, and
have
just the infinite heals. Like you saw,
so
it
much range
reached
and healing.
25
Yeah,
distant. It
exactly.
reached 25 minutes, and you couldn't kill them.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing that people were talking about a lot on Twitter and Reddit after the fact is like TL built no heal cutting almost the entire game. You know, they kind of bought it at the end when they were unfortunately losing the game. But when you have Gwen, Senna, Seraphine, and Wukong, like you got to buy some healing reduction. And you know, there was
The
discussion
thing
on
is,
Twitter talking about like, you know, obviously it's nerfed, so do you put, you know, that value into it from the beginning, and maybe Team Liquid doesn't even think it's worth it, and more damage is just the way to go. And I think, you know, that's a question that you have to ask yourself, you know, in these games when healing is prevalent because the heal cutting options are so weak now. But at the same time, when 4 of the 5 champions use healing so effectively, you gotta buy it. I don't care who you are or what champion you're playing, like you gotta buy it. Somebody has to.
I agree. I agree that you need it. However, I just don't think that that game had much to do with the heal reduction. Like they just whiffed on so many engages, and that to me is the big issue. And even though I sound so like negative on TL, their early games looked really freaking good this weekend, man. Like really, like they've had good early games all split long. I thought that they looked much better even this weekend. So like I don't know. I still think TL's ramping up. Yeah, maybe I'm just TL apologist, but I don't know, man. I still think that this team is going to be a threat. I don't have any doubts that their series, if they play against either EG or 100 Thieves, that they're going to be close series. I think that right now we have 3 teams that I feel really good about sending to Worlds, and I don't really feel like usually every year it feels like our third seed feels weaker than the rest. I don't feel like we have a third seed this year. I feel like we got 3 second seeds or first seeds maybe. Maybe I'm getting a little too optimistic coming into Worlds, but yeah, I don't know. I don't feel like they're lagging behind, but that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would personally say that TL is like right there at that level, because to me it just seems like there is a massive hole in their game, which is, you know, their late game and their team fighting, which against the top teams in the league has not been very good. Obviously, TL continues to crush the teams below them, and that should be expected of a top team. All of the top teams should be crushing the teams below them. However, you know, they continue to have bad mid and late games against the top teams, and to me, that's not a good sign, especially going into playoffs. I do think, you know, we talked about it, and I completely agree. TL is the strongest early game team in the league. It's either them or CLG, one of those 2 teams. I would say I have more confidence in Team Liquid's early game, but it's about can they continue that snowball? Because as of right now, you know, unless they're running away with the game, I wouldn't say that, you know, TL's a lock at, you know, 3, 4K gold leads, you know, at 20, 25 minutes.
Hmm. As far as the MVP of the team goes, I'm going Santorin. I think that first, well, we mentioned their early game is the best part of their game, and I think in big part to Santorin. Now, a lot of people will point to it's easy to jungle when your lanes are winning, and yeah, that's kind of true. But still, like he still makes so many ganks happen, and I think he's a big part as the reason why the lanes are winning. His pathing is usually great, and he usually finds a way to get past vision and get a very early gank. And I don't know, he's just been diving towers like crazy lately. So my MVP for the team is Santorin.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between it's easy to jungle when your lanes are winning and what you're doing as the jungler makes it easier for your lanes to win those lanes. And I think
Yeah.
that is the main thing when I think about when it comes to Santorin. He's just making everybody else's life easier by protecting people when they're trying to shove out waves and having good gank timings and having good early objective control. Like Team Liquid is one of the best teams in the LCS in terms of going for double Rift Herald in the early game. Like they put a huge priority on that, and a lot of that has to do with Santorin and the types of champions that he's playing because he does play these very early game focused champions like the Xin Zhao, the not the Jarvan, the Trundle, and the Skarner these last 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, no, I'm not too worried about TL. I know maybe I should be, maybe I'm too naive and maybe I just give them too much credit, but I'm really not. I think they'll show up when playoffs come around. I have a lot more confidence in them than I do C9, for example. Um CLG?
Yep. CLG up next. They ended up fourth place, but got a bit of a scare at the end because
Yeah.
had Cloud9 would have if Cloud9 would have beaten EG in that last game, they would have been playing a tiebreaker for fourth place. Not that it really matters because Cloud9 was going to be playing CLG in the playoffs regardless, but I just think it would have just the fourth place gains side selection. I think that's just the main advantage. Obviously, you know, fourth and fifth didn't really matter. It was more about could you reach third or could you fall to sixth? And CLG, they're safely in there. They're in fourth place. And honestly, a very, very much improved CLG overall from last split. I think you look at every single player individually on this roster, maybe with the exception of Luger, I think you could say improved over the course of, the full year.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I would,
It
I
was
guess what I'll say is I don't think Luger got worse. I just think that we just saw the rest of CLG start to like shine a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree. Like we mentioned last week that if CLG won a game in spring, it was usually because of their bot lane. It feels like they can play around just about everyone on their lineup now, and so that's kind of what you're seeing. I will say that we have to talk about Dokla because he did not have a good weekend at all. Um, just weird things, man. Like he's getting hard smashed in lane. He's just sacrificing a whole wave to try to contest Gromp. Like I don't like weird things are going on. I don't know what was going on in his head. And if you're a CLG fan, you're probably starting to worry like, oh no, are these guys gonna choke? And they kind of were. Like I don't know, losing to TSM isn't a good sign there. Now maybe TSM isn't quite as bad as people want them to be, but they're still not good. Like that's still a win you got to take. And the thing that a lot of people have been saying about CLG all split long is like those wins that you need to have against the bottom tier teams to prove that you're a top tier team. They've been getting those until they lost to TSM this weekend. So I was like, crap. Even against 100 Thieves, they have a great start to the game, right? Contracts invades, he gets the kill, and then he dives mid lane. It's like, holy shit. And then Contracts kind of went back to little inty Contracts where he decides to just go in on the Jarvan and give a free shutdown over to someone on 100 Thieves. I don't remember who. So we,
That
we saw a little
engage
bit of
was
inting this
whack,
weekend.
dude.
Yeah,
He
we saw a
ran
little bit
in
of inting out of
1v4.
Contracts and Dokla.
Yeah, I'm definitely. I would think I would put. I definitely Dokla was did not have a good weekend, but I would also put Contracts up there, not right up there because he was doing some good things in the early game against 100 Thieves, but unfortunately inted it all away with that one play bot lane, which was I think a 1 for 4 in total, in that game against 100 Thieves, and then you just kind of saw the game instantly shift back into 100 Thieves' favor, and they closed it out pretty quickly.
And the thing is, like, okay, we mentioned how when EG lost to TL, I was like, it's one game, no problem, like, whatever. And while I want to be like the same thing with CLG, where I want to be like, it's one weekend, it's not just that because we saw Contracts in for a whole split. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like when you see that, you do start to worry a little bit because he really had a rough game against TSM as well, just not respecting the engage from TSM, and then he entered against 100 Thieves. So it's like,
You kind
I
of
don't
got some of
know.
those bad
Overall,
memories.
exactly, right? You can't ignore it. Now, even with that said, I still have Contracts as the MVP of this team for this split. I think that, yes, not a great weekend, but a split, he had a great split. And I had considered him for all pro. However, there's just a lot of really good junglers in our league, and so I couldn't put him in there. But I do think that he's an honorable mention for the all pro list because I thought he was really, really aggressive and in a successful way, getting a lot of successful ganks in so many different games. I don't know if he's like the first blood leader of the league, but I wouldn't be surprised if he is.
Yeah, I think the two that I mainly had it for was either between Dokla or Contracts, and I was leaning a bit more towards the Contract side. And people might say, "Oh, what are you talking about? You had Dokla on 13 All Pro," but I think that there was a big opportunity for a multitude of top laners to make All Pro because the role was so weak,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to Jungle, which traditionally has been one of North America's strongest roles. Blabber wasn't even on there, and Blabber necessarily didn't have a great split. I mean, he was all right for the most part, but the play of Inspired, Closer, and Santorin was just so good that Construct just kind of got left out. It was just
Yeah.
unfortunate for him because I think a performance like this probably would have landed him on this list in previous splits, but the 1-2-3 of Jungle was too strong for him, and I think I would have to go with Contracts for the MVP of this split. For CLG, um, he definitely seemed to have, and I mentioned this I think last week or the week before, like much more controlled aggression in the early game with sort of picking his battles and coordinating with his team better in terms of early invades, ganks. Unfortunately, we saw this weekend a little bit more of that Inting contracts, but for the most part, in totality, like contracts had a pretty strong split, and I think the rest of CLG also had a great split. Like Dokla, like their solo laners for me was like the other big part of success for this team was Dokla and Palafox were much improved from previously when they had Jenkins and Palafox. I mean, I thought Palafox should have been replaced, but he also was like up there, with strong performing mid laners.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of people that are pushing for Palafox to be on the All Pro as well. I didn't think that he had that great of a start to the split. I do think that the later parts, I think that recently he's been really good. I don't think we saw enough consistency throughout the whole split for me to warrant putting him on there. But I do want to acknowledge what you're saying that like he was a much improved player. His Azir was pretty nice. For I don't know last month or so. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, an honorable mention there. Now CLG they get a week off, right? They don't play this week coming up.
Oh, they do.
Oh, they do.
Yep.
Oh, then I'm a little more Monka S then. I thought that they had a week off to fix some stuff. Then okay, well Monka S. I was gonna say it's okay, CLG fans. They got a week to figure their shit out, or
Nope.
like an extra week to figure their shit out. No, no, no. They have 1 week, or I guess kind of like 5 days, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. Cloud9 is who
Yep.
we're gonna go to next. A lot of inconsistency out of them this split, ups and downs. What are your thoughts, Jinter, as the Cloud9 fan?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say and sort of pinpoint where things went wrong per se. Obviously, they didn't have their roster practicing or even for the first week of LCS. So really,
Mm-hmm.
this team has only been practicing since right after week 1 of LCS. It's not as cookie cutter as that because Berserker's obviously been on the team before and Sven has been with the team all of last split as well. But as a 5-man squad, bringing Jensen into the team also and Fudge role swapping back, they never really got a chance to truly gel. And I think that for the most part, they've figured it out a little bit. It's funny. I remember, or not remember, but when I was watching the co-streams, Doublelift kind of made the point of, Cloud9 is a little bit comparable to EG from last split, where they didn't have a strong start because Cloud9 started off the split 0-3. Last split, EG started off the split, I think 1-5 or 2-4, one of those things, and they kind of put it all together right as the split was ending and playoffs was starting. And you saw EG kind of took over the league, and Doublelift was making a bit of the comparison. Like Cloud9 could be the EG of this split, where they didn't have a great start to the split. But you could see improvements throughout the split, and come playoffs is when it really turned around. And I think I've talked about this in the past that I think Cloud9 will definitely be a better best of 5 team than a best of 1 team because of the versatility that this team has. We've seen Fudge play a multitude of champion roles. Same with Blabber, same with Jensen, and Sven before he made the role swap to support has been known for his various mage picks in the bot lane and unorthodox play. He was a big Swain bot player when Swain was really meta back in season 8 and 9. Even played some of the Syndra bot and other things like that even late season 8. So you're definitely right though with them being a little bit inconsistent. They seem to have a strong middle, and then they had that pretty bad 0-2 weekend against both 100 Thieves and CLG, and that kind of pulled fans kind of pulled back with that because it's like, oh well, like they just put up a really bad stinker kind of a week before playoffs. And looking at this last weekend, they had pretty clean games for the most part, minus that Evil Geniuses game. Definitely could have gone either way. Cloud9 and EG were kind of taking turns, like throwing the game. But I don't think I'm not as cold as Cloud9 on UR, and that could be because of my bias. But I would probably put them in the ballpark of Team Liquid. And I guess for me, I didn't really speak to it, but I wouldn't put TL in that group of EG and 100 Thieves. I probably would have it as like EG 100 Thieves are in that tier 1. Tier 2 is TL and Cloud9, and it'd be in like tier 2.5 is CLG, something like that. But for me, I have confidence with Cloud9. I would say that, I won't spoil it, but I think, they'll be moving on in the upper bracket for next week, and not next week, sorry, but the week after when they face one of the top teams, presumably, will be the true test, and I think kind of we'll figure out what this team really is.
Yeah, I think you're You're right in assessing that we're not on the same page when it comes to Cloud9. I think there is way too much inconsistency with this team. I don't put them up there with TL. We mentioned last week that like right now Blabber's kind of the problem, but could also be the solution. We need to start seeing him solve these issues because it's just I don't know. I guess in the tiebreaker game he looked good, but I mean that that game was a huge draft canyon pretty much. He had the zillion, which like he's allowed to be more blabber, which is good, right? When you draft 4 to play around blabber, that's great and all. But I think there has not been the same amount of consistency or clean engages that you used to come to get from blabber, and yeah, that worries me. That worries me a lot when you're not getting the consistency out of him because I do think this team lives or dies by him. And so that's kind of the area I'm looking at. The other thing too is you mentioned Fudge, not the same guy that we saw last year, right? That's a big question mark. So I don't know, man. I just don't buy it. I have way more confidence in TL with their early game than I do with Cloud9 with the way they've been looking.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is to me it's kind of TL's early game versus Cloud9's late game. I have not as much faith in Cloud9's early game because of Blabber's inconsistencies, and even Sven at times. I think he's gotten better throughout the split. Especially at the beginning, we could see Sven making a lot of positional mistakes in the early game. I think he's sort of cleaned those up a little bit, but it still happens from time to time. But I mean, maybe it's just me, but I don't like TL's late game at all. So, and I think Cloud9, because of the way that they have been playing lately, with for the most part very scaling oriented, specifically in their solo lanes, if they can get out of the early game unscathed, and what I mean by unscathed, if Blabber doesn't go psycho fish mode and has either a lead or a lead in terms of objectives, I definitely think that Cloud9 is a very scary team going to mid and late game.
Yeah. MVP Berserker. Yeah.
Yep. I think it's Berserker, and I think mainly for me is just the consistency. I think maybe in terms of the actual translation of most valuable player, it is Blabber because they do sort of live and die by Blabber, like I said last week. But I think
I don't think Blabber's been their best player, man. I think Berserker's been their best. That's the way I look at MVP. Is just who's the best player, man. The MVP of this team has been Berserker. I think that he has had the least faults in his gameplay. So yeah, I can't really look to anyone else on Cloud9 when it comes to the most valuable player on this team for this split.
Yeah, it's Berserker.
Yeah. Let's go FlyQuest now. FlyQuest.
Yep, they
clearly above
sixth.
The rest.
Yeah, definitely. They're the clear. There's a clear top 6 and bottom 4 in this case. Not to say that FlyQuest is like close to EG, TL, 100 Thieves, and even C9 for that part. I mean, they're relatively close to Cloud9 standings wise, but kind of saw them get a bit smacked around in that tiebreaker game. But ignoring that tiebreaker game, FlyQuest had a really good last weekend.
Yeah, for sure, man.
They were not necessarily in a position to even tiebreak for 5th place really, or even 4th place if CLG would have lost that last game. So FlyQuest did as much as they could pretty much to put themselves in the best possible position. And if we want to talk about what we were saying with the All Pro teams, like Aframo had a great split. He was we'll jump the gun a little bit here, but I had him as my MVP of this team. Like, I think you and us too, we've like really been on the train of Aframu is not like anywhere near as bad as people seem to make him out to be. Obviously, he had that he had a really bad season 9 on 100 Thieves, but ever since season 10 on Dignitas, like this guy has been a top 3 support in the league pretty much since then. Like it's been for me.
It's like the continued discussion that he is underrated, right? Like that's a continued discussion that we seem to have every freaking split. It seemed like every time we have to talk about how Aframu played over the split, it's always like good, always.
Yeah.
I actually gave the MVP to Takui though, and the thing is, this is the one that like I struggled with the most because I think Takui had a great split. I think Jose Deodo and I think Aframu all could be considered the MVP of this team. I do think there was a couple of hiccups, if more specifically for this weekend, from Johnson and from Philip. But I think that was kind of consistent throughout the split. That like they didn't have like the most consistent games. But I still think that the team's solid for the most part. And I cannot believe how like you have Philip come into the lineup who's supposed to be a top laner that's supposed to struggle. Jose Deodo gets so many successful ganks top I don't know if there's a way to check that, like what number of ganks he has in the top lane that are successful. But I would have to imagine that Jose Dioto leads the league in top lane ganks because oh my god, those two just work really well together. And I've seen many times that like Philip doesn't really do the best with his wave. Honestly, he's got pretty poor wave management, which is what you usually expect out of a rookie. But Jose Dioto makes it work anyways. So I was like, man, like even when you got this guy who's supposed to struggle, says the FlyQuest management and coaching staff, he hasn't struggled at all. And I think a big part of the reason for that is because Jose Dioto and him work so well together. So I was like, maybe I could point to him. Takui is really, really oppressive. Even this weekend on the LeBlanc, he was making closers' life hell. And then, of course, he made even the game-winning pick there. He didn't get the kill, but the game-winning pick where he flanks on the LeBlanc and they end up cleaning up that team fight. So, like, I don't know, man. I couldn't figure out who the MVP of this team is. I think there's reason for all three of those guys that I mentioned.
Yeah, I feel like, nowadays everyone wants to talk about mid jungle synergy and, how it being kind of one of the most important things. But FlyQuest to me seemed like a really jungle support like centric team. For the most part, we've really seen the bot lane meta shift more towards the enchanters as opposed to the engaged supports. But Aphromoo is really one of the only supports that continued to play a lot of the engaged supports throughout the rest of the split. We've seen him on Leona, Alistar even. He had a couple Nautilus games, early on, but he seemed to be one of the few supports in the LCS that continued to focus on the engagers. And I think he does a really good job with Jose Diodo, pairing up and going around the map, specifically around, bot lane, mid lane sort of objectives. And they work really, really well together. I think Takui, I still think he's really good. I wouldn't say that he's like a massive, he's a carry, but I think he does play more towards like game scaling. I'm not expecting him to be picking like Ari, Lissandra, like Silas type champions that are going to be all about skirmishing and during early levels. I definitely see him more as the control mage player, and I think he's really, really good at it. I mean, I wouldn't say he's like a Power of Evil, but he kind of has that esque like play style where he does focus a lot on his own lane and accruing basically as much gold as possible. And when given the opportunity and resources, carries the shit out of a lot of these games.
Yeah, the first like couple of weeks of the split was just put Takui on Corki and just wait for him to scale, and then he'll take over the game. And that's kind of what their game plan was for the first 2 or 3 weeks. Of course, Corki ended up getting nerfed, and they had to kind of switch away from that. But that was pretty much, they lived and died by Takui at the start of the split, and they had a lot of success with it as well. So I guess that's why I went him. On a side note, I saw a tweet from the LCS that was like he has the most player of the games this split, which was also like, oh shit, really? Now the weird thing is like, even though I have him as my MVP, I don't think he was that far ahead of anybody else on the team, like those other 2 players that I mentioned. So I just thought it was interesting that he had the most player of the games. That I just thought that was an interesting little fact that the LCS tweeted out. Lower bracket teams now.
Yep, we had TSM and Golden Guardians slot into our lower bracket spots. Obviously, Golden Guardians got that final playoff spot on the last day. Well, I guess not the last game of the day, but the second to last game of the day because of the tiebreakers, beating out Dignitas in a game that they probably should have lost. I mean, Jesus Christ.
What a mess.
I hate this team. I felt like I was a Golden Guardian fan before, but now I have a strong disdain for this team. I think they're bad. I don't think they deserve to be in playoffs. Once again, 8-team summer playoffs sucks.
The thing is, I agree with you, but like a month ago, this was a good team. I swear to God, this was a good team a month ago. Not an amazing team, but a good team.
Let's be honest here. You're definitely a bit you seem to be rating Golden Guardians a lot higher than a lot of other people for the majority of this, what I would say.
Dude, they played well though. Like I will stand by that. We did the power rankings. You didn't have them power ranked lower than I did. You had them by 1.
You had them, I think.
Let's not pretend like it was all different all of a sudden. You're going to play that game now.
You had them 3, I think.
I had them 5. You had them 6.
Oh, well, you had them
when
like
we
3 at one point.
we did our mid split. When we did our mid split power rankings.
I think early on you had them at like, you had them high up somewhere. I don't remember. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I feel like I thought I remember you said that they were like 3rd or something, and I had them at like 5th, 6th. I don't recall. Maybe I'm remembering incorrectly.
Regardless, even if you had them at 5th, 6th, JNT, that's not like what we had. Like, this team is really bad now. This is no longer a 5th, 6th place team. They suck. They are so bad. And it's so crazy to me how within like the span of like, I don't know, a year, how their solo lanes can get so bad. Like Licorice was not that bad last year. I mean, he was bad on FlyQuest. He went to Golden Guardians and looked solid. Olive had a great summer split last year. I think he was even all pro, or maybe he was just getting some votes for all pro last year. It
I
is
thought he should be on the All
amazing.
Pro team.
Yeah, so like my point being, like this team just fell off a cliff. Like I cannot believe how bad they have gotten. And like some of these things aren't even like player specific. Like even in that game against Dignitas, they understand that they have the Jacks that can split and that you could just start Baron if they send too many people to the Jacks, but like they still can't get on the same page as far as their timing is concerned, which is like not been an issue for, I don't even know, for any team for that matter. All of a sudden, like the simplest of things they just can't do well, and I can't put my finger on why. You They say that like they're having problems with their jungler and like making things happen, so they go and get River, and you think, okay, they should be able to make things happen. River is ganking early and making things happen in the early game, but it still doesn't matter. Their solo lanes are so fucking free that it's like they fixed one problem and it just spawned two more. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember at the end of season 11 talking about this Golden Guardians team. We were like, Licorice, and a Blaze Olive were, I think, the two people that both of us said like should continue to be on this team, and seemed like they were going to be sort of the players to build around. And it's just been a complete 180. Like Licorice is probably one of the worst tops in the league this year. I guess
Yeah.
the only other ones would be the two dig top laners you could probably put below him. And I mean, I've been a bit of a Gamsu enjoyer, so maybe I'm a bit biased here, but I would take Gamsu over Licorice based off of this split's performance. Um, yeah, Licorice was pretty horrible. A Blaze Olive. Fortunately, bro, I think your time in the LCS is probably done. He just dies way, way, way too much, and
Yeah.
it
He has no
that's
respect for the jungler whatsoever.
when you just continue to make these simple mistakes and the same mistake over and over and over again. That to me is a big problem because you're not fixing your problems, you're not improving on areas of weakness. You're just kind of doing the same thing. And I don't want to say I get the sense of like a Blaze Olive has an ego or whatever, because I don't want to make any big assumptions here, but from the few videos that I've seen from the Golden Guardians, like their YouTube channel, especially the one that I referenced last week, and what sounded like one of the reasons why he got replaced by Leader is he seemed to be very stubborn in his idea and view of the game. And like I said, I'm not trying to make all these assumptions based off of like a couple minutes of a YouTube video that I saw of them discussing like a specific instance in their post-match review of an LCS game. But I don't know. It just when you continue to make the same mistakes over and over and over again, not correct them, not make any attempt to try to see to fix them, like there's got to be some innate problem going on. And I
You're
don't know.
saying that there's got to be some point where you look in the mirror and say like there's something I'm doing wrong, rather than continue to do what you're doing.
Yeah.
You say to yourself, I need to change something because I'm the reason that we're falling behind in the early game.
Yeah, because I mean, I think the both of us think that their bot lane is actually pretty good. Like Styx and Ole have been a good bot lane,
Yeah, I
and
do. I think their bot lane's
while
still fine.
River's only been on this team for like 2 weeks now, like he's still a player you're presumably going to keep around.
And if we point to last split, remember how good this team was in the early game? This was maybe it was the best early game team last split, right? They just
Yeah,
kept
one of
throwing when it came to team fights
sure.
later. Now they have these problems where they can't even get through the laning phase without dying over and over again.
Yeah,
It's like just gank mid.
yeah, he's
Now
the
let's
he's the
let's talk a little
Phoenix.
bit about the whole Danon thing, because so their GM gets let go, and like this is just a mess as of late, right? Because you you trade for River, you don't start winning, but not only that, you also decide we're going to send Ole to Academy because you need to make room for Leader, who's an import slot, right? Because they had Yeah, because they had River was the other import slot, or Pride Stalker. So you can only have so many spots, but you think that it's worth to put in Leader and to get rid of Ole. Now, I think that was definitely a problem because for me, I thought Ole was their MVP. He's the guy that I'm giving the MVP award. So now you get rid of what I think is your best player in hopes to get, I don't even know, in hopes to fix your mid lane problem. But I don't even completely blame them for doing that, because it's like it's one of those things where you couldn't plug, there's too many holes to plug, and you can only have so many holes that you can plug at once. So it was like you had a mid problem. It was like, let's try swapping mid and see if that'll work. And it's like, okay, well, no, now you're putting in uh Prismal, who's an 80 carry. He's been a role swapped support for like 2 months. And the reason why this, I think, relates to Danon is because Danon traded away Chime like 2 months ago. It's like you don't even have a support left over anymore. And so a lot of people will point to the River deal not working out, and maybe that's why Danon got let go. I think it's more than that. I think it's you just sold your backup support where you don't have enough import slots. That's kind of where I'm looking at this.
Yeah, I mean, I think Prismal, he's been playing support, I think, for just this 1 year now. I think he,
I thought it was just a couple of months.
no, I think he role swapped at the beginning of this year, not split, but
Oh,
I'm not sure
I mean,
exactly.
even
So
still,
either way, a very new player, but I definitely, they probably thought that the boost that they were going to get from putting Leader in over Blaze Olive was going to be greater than the loss from Ole to Prismal. And, if you want to see that as a reason where, the GM, maybe his thinking is incorrect there, or whatever you want to say. But at the same time, I think, Danon's been done dirty a little bit because he was around when they built basically the 100 Thieves roster that we see right now, of the
yeah.
closer, I guess at the time it wasn't Abadage, but
FBI,
yeah, but the big trio of
FBI
closer
Huhi, right?
FBI Huhi, like he was the one that made that happen and created it, and just unfortunately
Yeah,
the
and of course
team,
you could give credit to the coaching staff
yeah,
as well, right?
but
Not just Dane, but yeah, that group. I get what you're saying.
yeah, and just the team was never in a position to sign them. And then you look at, season 11 Golden Guardians, so I think actually was still a pretty good team, and you go into season 12 with, your trio of Licorice, Ablaze Olive, and Stixay, whom at the time seemed to be a very, very, very strong trio, and I think everybody else agreed, thought that, you get the right jungler and you get the right support, and we can maybe, be a decent playoff team, and it just doesn't work out. And, once again, I don't necessarily think you can really fault Danon that much for it, because how can anybody expect the huge drop off that Licorice and Ablaze Olive had from season 11 summer to season 12 summer right now? Like, it was massive. Like, I said this, like, I thought Ablaze Olive should have been on the All Pro team in season 11, and now he's down there with some of the worst mids in the league. And Licorice, while he struggled on FlyQuest, came over to Golden Guardians, had a pretty good end to the split, but is like 9th, 10th place top laner right now. So, I don't know. It feels like Danon got done a little bit dirty, because I think for the most part, Golden Guardians has done a pretty good job of finding, good individual talented players. But they just haven't been able to bring it together as a team, unfortunately. And I don't know how much you can fault the GM for that, as opposed to, the coaching staff per se. Like, I just don't know who
I
you can
mostly
place
agree.
most of the blame on.
I mostly agree because I think if you have the opportunity to get River, I think almost anyone would do that. Even if it's if like because there's a chance that it's not just for this year, right? Maybe you're able to hold on to River for next year, right? And like that's okay. Now you got like River's great. So like I don't know that I have no problem with that. I think that's just the biggest move as of late, and so people are going to point to that and say, "Oh, you went and got River, and now you're not winning." Maybe it costs a bunch of money, and they promise like if we get River, we're going to start winning. Where I can fault though is the support thing that I mentioned, right?
Yeah,
Like
I agree
if
with
you
you there.
intended to put in leader, you knew that you either needed a green card for Ole or that you would have to put in, a different support. You decided to trade away your support or sell them to like TSM, and now you have no support left over. I guess you have Prismal, who's been playing support for not long. We don't know exactly how long, but not long. So that's an area where, like, that's not a good look. But to your point, most of what we've seen out of Golden Guardians over the last couple of years, I don't necessarily fault their GM for doing. And most of the stuff has been good moves, you would argue. So I think there's some truth to what you're saying where it feels like he's being done a little dirty.
Dude, who was their mid laner when they were on Golden Guardians? And that was,
Demonte?
oh yeah, I was trying to name the mid laner. I just forgot who it was. But yeah, you're right. It was
Demonte
Demonte.
also went over to
Yeah,
100
yeah. I
Thieves.
just couldn't think of the name. I was like,
Yeah.
who the hell? Because I was gonna say Abadage, but he wasn't on Golden Guardians, obviously. But
No, no.
yeah,
I got you.
it's hard to say. I do feel a little bit bad for Danon, because for the most part he's done a pretty good job. But
Yeah.
as of late, if the organization's thinking is that he's made the wrong decisions with these moves, with trading away Chime, and unfortunately you're in a position to have to put in an inexperienced young player who's role swapping into LCS to try to make playoffs. Clearly didn't work out because Golden Guardians on an 8-game loss streak. They were lucky to win that last game. Like I said before, like I was rooting for Dig to win that game. I don't think this team deserves to be in playoffs. They're gonna get 3-0'd by whoever they play. Doesn't matter who it is.
Man, it would have felt so bad for River to get traded from an already bad team to go to another bad team, and then you lose to your old bad team. Ooh, that would have been bad. That would have been really bad. Yeah. TSM?
Yep, TSM. They were 7th. We kind of just jumped the Golden Guardians because, obviously there's a lot to say about this team. But similar to TSM, a team that has been struggling and has also been making a lot of changes. But I feel like some of these, we're starting to see the positive results from these changes. Chime seems to be actually a pretty solid LCS support. Very much different from his time on Golden Guardians. Solo continues to be the emergency top laner in need for any LCS team. It requires a top laner if they want to make a playoff / worlds push. But I'm going to address the elephant in the room. Instinct, that guy is still not good. And I remember Doublelift saying back even when he first got put onto TSM, he thought that Instinct was like one of the worst ADCs in Champions Queue. And that's not necessarily like a good look when, you're one of, in Doublelift's opinion, you're one of the worst players on the Champions Queue server. To then be going to a starting spot on TSM. He's been really, really bad. But I'm not really faulting him too much because he's such a new player. I'm not as upset with his performance over like in a Blaze Olive or Licorice. He's a new player. He's struggling. That's understandable. And I guess on the same point, I wouldn't say that if they had a better AD carry, they'd be in some position to start beating some of these top teams and maybe have a chance at the playoffs. Because I mentioned it before, I think there is a pretty big gap between TSM and the rest of the pack looking up. Like, I would still put a big gap between them and FlagQuest, C9, CLG, and even a much bigger gap in between the top of like 100 Thieves and EG.
Yeah. Mostly good things are actually happening for once for TSM. Like, yeah, Instinct hasn't looked good, but like the rest of the roster looked pretty good for what is an obvious band-aid, right? Like, Chime wasn't supposed to be there. We mentioned how he just got traded there. Solo, just insert Solo into a team and things are fine. Like, it's actually crazy that like you have this guy, and yes, I realize that the reason why he's not on a team is usually for his toxicity, or at least that's how the story is being told. But it is crazy to me that you can have this guy that's not on a team whatsoever be subbed in and be better than the top lane. Like, he's been playing better than Hooney was. And that's kind of crazy. Now, Hooney had wrist issues, to be fair, but it's just so crazy that like you have this guy who's available that is good enough to play, and he's just not on any team. It's just a little strange. But they're looking pretty good for the most part. I think Speak is working really well with Chime. I've noticed that they engage really well together. They chain their CC really, really well. Specifically saw it against Contracts a couple times this weekend. And so, yeah, looking pretty good for what should be a huge dumpster fire. And I gave Speaka the MVP of this team.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I hadn't even thought about it, but I think you have to sort of default give it to him because he played the whole split, but I'm going to not really count that, and I'm just going to go with what I've seen from TSM from insert new roster onwards, and I think for those reasons, I'm going to give it to Chime, because I think he actually has been pretty good. Not to fault Speaka for that, because he's been the best player on TSM, and he's been playing for the entire split, but from what I've seen of Chime, of the games that he's played on the starting roster so far, I think his performance in those games have been greater than Speaka's performance over the course of those games.
TSM is a weird one, right? Because they've had so many different iterations of the roster, and it's only some players have been playing for X amount of time. So I don't mind you going that way and saying like I think Chime's been the best since this iteration of the roster, because he has been really, really good. Everyone's going to remember the Bard game, of course, because that's his one trick. But yeah, he was great on the Bard, right? Like, yeah, and it's not just that. His Rakan's been good. So like, anyways, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't have them doing much in playoffs, but yeah. For how bad it could have been, it's okay. They finished 7th, but they could have. It looked like they were ready for another 9th or 10th. So I mean, it's not the end of the world, I guess.
Yeah, I do see them obviously being a little bit more competitive than Golden Guardians. I think TSM has the potential to win some games should they get the correct matchup. I would say that CLG seems to be the one team that they do have a little bit of an edge over because of CLG's sort of volatility in the early game. I mean, you can kind of say the same thing for Cloud9, but to me, Cloud9, their mid and late game is just it's just much better than TSM's. But I mean, we even saw it in the Super Week. If CLG goes int mode, like TSM can beat them. But I'm not expecting them to do even to win a series. So
Did you give an MVP for Golden Guardians?
yeah, I said Ole.
Oh, okay.
I was like, I agree. Pretty much.
Yeah. Sorry, I must have just missed it. Who we going to next? The eliminated teams?
Yep. Unfortunately for Immortals and Dignitas, they did not make playoffs. Although there was a potential scenario for if Dig would have won against Golden Guardians in that last game, we would have been doing 3-way tiebreakers for 8th place. Another fucking meme.
Almost got that monkey fight, man.
Like, dude,
we almost got that monkey fight.
Please remove this 18 playoff next split. I feel like the proof from this split has been enough to take it away. Because how long have they had it in now for? They had it for season 11 summer, or season 10 summer, season 11 summer, and now season 12 summer. And if my memory serves me right, there is
every time it's 3-0s.
Yeah, I think there was 1-3-1, which was when EG played Dig in season 11 summer, and it was a 3-1 in EG's favor when EG got dropped to the lower bracket. So if my memory serves me correct, every single series has been a 3-0 except for one of them. And that should be enough data to say that these 7th and 8th seeds.
I'm just so tired of this conversation. Like, I don't care, man. Like,
I care. This is shit.
I don't care that there's 8 teams. Whatever, then. Don't watch it, then. Because isn't this the way they do the...
I have to watch it. We do this thing.
The whatchamacallit, the gauntlet thing. So it's like you just do it in playoffs rather than do it after.
But they don't need 7th and 8th to be there. Do it exactly how EU does it, where 5 and 6 are already in the lower bracket. I think that system is way better.
I'm tired of this conversation. I feel like we've just had it a million times. The LCS doesn't seem like they want to. If they change it, I wouldn't mind, honestly. Like, I wouldn't mind if what you're saying if they did that. It's just, I'm just so like, how many splits in a row are they going to keep doing this, or years in a row, rather, are they going to keep doing this? It's like, whatever. I'm done with it. They want to do 8 teams. That's life. Whatever. MVP for Immortals, I think it has to be PoE. It does feel bad because this team felt like they were like able to almost turn it around. Like they started playing a lot better. They had competitive games, and nope, they just stopped picking up those dubs real quick.
Yeah, they didn't. Yeah. I wouldn't say they had a difficult. I mean, they had some tough matchups going into the Super Week. Pretty much, we talked about it last week. Whichever team of these bottom 3 of Immortals, Dignitas, and Golden Guardians, whoever won one game was going to make it. And, we did talk about how Golden Guardians kind of had that free game against Dignitas, but Immortals, they had tough games, but they weren't the toughest of games. Like, they had the teams pretty much directly above them in FlyQuest, CLG, and Cloud9. And, they weren't really competitive in most of those games, but, they fell short. And, I don't think anybody was expecting Immortals to be a good team anyway this split. I think for the most part, a lot of people had them power ranked as the 10th place team, and they almost squeaked into playoffs, and it's hard to take a lot of things away from this split. I mean, I guess the main thing that I would take away is Ignar is still looking pretty decent, and I would keep that guy around. However, I think there's still a lot of question marks with the rest of the roster. Loss is not very good. PoE's unique playstyle can sometimes hinder the team more than help the team. Kenvi is obviously still a very, very new player. And while Revenge, I think, had some pop-off moments this split, I still maintain the opinion Revenge has one good game for every 2 or 3 bad games, and that's still a big problem.
Yeah, nothing really more for me to add. I don't really have much to say. Whenever we do the teams that are eliminated, we always do the
MVP. I'd say Ignar, by the way.
Okay.
I don't know if I explicitly said
when teams are eliminated, we always do the 1 to 10 with how happy the teams should be with their split. Considering that they weren't able to practice, kind of like the C9 kind of scenario. I guess I can't give them a 1 because they did start to turn around, but I can't go much higher. I guess I'd maybe give them a 2. You still got knocked out, right? Like there's no one that's even close to happy with how the split went. I guess I could give them a 2 out of 10 just because they had that never give up couple of weeks where they showed some life. But other than that, the split was a pure disaster.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say I'd give them a 3. And one of the things that I always took into account when giving these scores, especially when it comes to the bottom teams in the league, is I feel like they don't have that many questions going into next year in terms of how they want to build their roster. It's not like, oh, we don't really know kind of what direction we're going. There's a pretty clear direction, in my opinion, and it would be to dump Revenge, PoE, and Lost. And if you want to keep around Kenvi because he's cheap and he's a rookie and has potential, you can do that. And you keep Ignar because he's a solid player. And they, I had them as a 10th place team, and they almost made playoffs, I guess. And I had zero expectations for this team, anyways. And when you can find at least a couple players to build around when you're a bottom tier team and you didn't have any expectations of making playoffs or even doing any damage in playoffs, anyways, I think that's like a bit of a win. So it's
Yeah.
it's better than nothing. But I mean, yeah, you kind of said it, like you got knocked out when 8 of the 10 teams are making it. Like that's still kind of embarrassing.
I could see them keeping PoE as well, but then you got to worry like, okay, you're going to keep 3 pieces of what was a pretty bad roster. That's a lot. Like, you got to change a little more than that, I think,
Yeah.
anyway. Like, do they. Who would be the top laner that you're replacing, and who would be the AD carry to make this team so much better? That would be the question. So,
Hmm.
I guess they'll have to wait and see what options are available to them. But that's assuming they're still in the league. There's rumors that some teams are looking to sell. We don't know who.
Yep.
Um, when it comes to Dignitas, however, I still gave Biofrost the MVP. I thought that even though he had a slow start to the split, I think that most of the mid and later half of the split, he was pretty consistent. I thought that he's just the guy that starts their fights. Really good engage player. He's a guy that you can rely on mostly, and I think that they did it for most of the split. The rest of the team was pretty much a disaster. Blue had a pretty okay split. Nothing tremendous for me. I'm a little bit more cold on Blue than you are. I do agree that he is underrated. I think that there's just quick hate for Blue, but I don't think he's anything too spectacular. So nothing too crazy came out of too crazy came out of Dig this split, and so I think I would just give them a 1. Honestly, they ended up having to just sell their best player and put in all players that I don't think belong in the league. Yes, small sample size, and yes, they're joining a dumpster fire, but I wasn't too impressed with any of them, if I'm being completely honest. And so I think this is one of the worst case scenarios for your split. So I give Dig a 1.
Yeah, I'm going with the 1 here as well. And once again, part of my logic is like, what what do you have to work with going into next year? And like you said, they subbed out a large majority of their roster with a new top laner, new jungler, new ADC. Also, you traded that jungler to a different team who was your best player, who you won't have now. All of the players that you brought in to at least get a sneak peek of what they could be in the LCS looked way out of place. Like maybe the closest one was Spawn, and he still wasn't good whatsoever at all. But you know, with this team, there's almost like nothing to build around. And I guess I wouldn't say nothing, but you have to ask yourself: is Blue? While I think he's pretty good, I'd give him my personal MVP. But is he worth the import slot? Is there a chance you can get somebody better because the value of those import slots are so high? Biofrost is probably a player I'd consider keeping around, but at the same time, you got to wonder with being a probably an underfunded, not very, like not a lot of structure within this team. You got to wonder, like, is it maybe worth their time to try to develop a different support player? Because Biofrost is, I mean, he's a older player in this league, not in terms of his age, but in terms of how long he's been playing within the league. And when you're a bottom tier team, you got to ask yourself the question of holding on to these older veterans or at least trying to develop newer players. So I feel like they have nothing to work with going forward.
I would 100% keep Biofrost because even if you're going to go for a developmental roster, you do need some veterans that can kind of dictate how you're going to play the game and kind of lead. And I think that's something you would get out of Biofrost. So I would not get rid of him at all. I think that's the one piece you absolutely have to keep. But that's just me.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I mean
that's
it's whatever direction they want to take the team in. However, it's just like what direction do they even go in is my point.
you know. Okay, playoffs now. Playoffs are coming up.
Yep.
Kind of hype. We got TL versus Fly and CLG versus C9. Crazy that CLG is actually going to be in a playoff series.
Well,
That's pretty insane.
Now, I won't even say what I was gonna say.
You're gonna say the top 8 thing, but they don't
Yeah,
finish
yeah.
top
No,
8 normally.
I mean, like in any other world, they probably would have made it still. And we won't even get into it. But the first match of playoffs is Team Liquid versus FlyQuest. TL being the number 3 seed, FlyQuest being the number 6 seed. I mean, I don't know how quickly we want to get into this, but I don't really see a way for FlyQuest to really win this game. I guess it just would have to be, hoping that TL doesn't run through you in the early game and getting Takui on a great scaling mid and getting Philip a safe neutral topside matchup, because I feel like top lane is the main way that TL is probably going to try to abuse this team from what we've seen specifically out of TL in the last 2 to 3 weeks, where they're playing very, very much so for the Whippo 1v1 in the draft, and then in turn, bringing Santorin up there and getting kills and making tower dives happen. And Philip, while he's been a pretty good player for the most part, as we mentioned before, everyone thought he was going to struggle. He hasn't, but that's partially because
compared
Jose
to
Diodo,
expectations, right?
Yeah.
He's been great compared to expectation.
Yeah, but Jose Diodo has been spending a lot of time up there, ensuring that he is in a bit of a neutral game state, and TL is the kind of team to kind of just force the action and get Philip down.
Yeah. I do worry for that lane the most, honestly. Whenever you have a rookie player, you worry about how they're going to play in a best of 5. But not only that, you're going up against Bwipo in a best of 5. And yeah, while Bwipo is not he's not Fnatic Bwipo, he's still a really, really good player. He's someone I would be really, really afraid of when it comes to a best of. I'm not that hopeless on FlyQuest in this series, though. I do think they are outclassed for the most part, but I do think that this roster from FlyQuest we've seen go beyond our expectation pretty much the whole split long, maybe even year long. So I'm going to give them a game. I'm going to go 3-1 TL. I do think that TL is going to come out on fire, though, and be really aggressive in the early game that we've come to see. This, to me, is where I think we're going to start to see them capitalize on their leads and start to close them out. And if you can't start to do that against FlyQuest, then I will be a lot more cold on them. Maybe like you are. I don't know if I'm putting words in your mouth here. But yeah, I think they'll be able to be just fine against FlyQuest. I'm going to go 3-1.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll get the 3-0. It's just more of a question for me against the other top teams of EG100 and C9 if they play them at some point, although it's unlikely based on how the bracket's being seeded. I'm going with the 3-0.
Okay, and then we got CLG versus C9. This one's tough to me because we mentioned how much C9's just kind of inconsistent. But also you're starting to see CLG really struggle. The thing is, okay, we mentioned how awesome it is that CLG has a huge turnaround and they've made playoffs and the split was great. But what would it mean if they just got knocked out instantly, right? They go right to the lower bracket and then maybe they get knocked out in the lower bracket as well. I feel like you would still hold on to okay, this team has turned it around, but it would just mean so much more if they show up in playoffs and make these series competitive. And so while I don't have them going to Worlds, CLG still has so much more to prove if they show up in this series, and especially if they win the series. That to me would really absolutely stamp that this is no longer the CLG of old, right? Because let's say they do get knocked out, and let's say they lose again in losers bracket, and it's just over, right? And then next year they're a bad team again. People will quickly forget. But if you win a playoff series, especially against a team like C9, who's got a really long history of making playoff runs, that to me says that the old CLG is officially gone. You could cut off that part and start a new chapter. So I think that this series means so much more than just moving on in a playoff series. This winning a playoff series for CLG is new chapter, which is huge for them, and so they need this one.
But are they going to? That's the question, Blue Jay. Who are you picking?
I am going to pick C9. I would have picked CLG if it weren't for such struggles as of late. My worry is you kind of know what you're going to get out of CLG. You know that Contracts is going to be ganking very, very heavily, and I think C9 can prep for that. Get your wards down, Forehead. And it's not that simple, and I maybe I shouldn't make it sound that simple. But I do believe, I have faith in C9 being able to, I don't know, prep for an early gank style gameplay or even draft for it. Like
Yeah,
there's a
that's the
world where you
main
just don't let
expectation I would
Contracts
see.
get the Poppy. Like Contracts has been great on Poppy. Maybe you just don't let him get that pick. Or maybe you play something that's good into Jarvan, for example. Like you could prep for an early game tussle, if you will.
Yeah, that's the main place that I expect Cloud9 to sort of make the necessary changes is in the draft, because I mean I wouldn't say that CLG's game is, one dimensional, but I do think that, as you kind of said, their approach is somewhat standard, and in that case it's a little bit obvious. For the most part, you're gonna see Dokla on a strong side lane champion, Contracts on a team fight early game oriented jungler, Palafox on a scaling mid laner, and Luker and Poom playing some sort of safe scaling bot lane, whether that's a Sivir Zeri or that's even like some sort of enchanter lane with the Seraphine down there. And I feel like Cloud9 can prepare a multitude of strategies to try to solve the puzzle, if you want to even call it a puzzle. And part of the reason why I thought earlier Cloud9 is gonna be a better playoff team than regular season team is because they have that versatility. And I guess I would sort of expect, if CLG were to get behind in the series, to sort of bring out some more of those unique styles that we've seen in the past. They were one of the few teams that was playing Sona before. I mean, at the same time, Cloud9 was also another team, the only other team that was playing Sona. But I would expect the quote unquote cheese strategies to come out in this series from the CLG side if they get down.
Yeah. And I guess even though Blabber has not been the best version of himself that we've seen, I do have faith in him being able to handle Contracts. I guess that's also what it comes down to. I will give CLG a game as well. I'm going to go with the boring 3-1 predictions, but I do think that C9 is going to take it. I'm going to give him 3-1.
Yeah, I mean, initially I was thinking I was going to go 3-1, but maybe I'll just shout out go 3-0 because
Go 3-0 again?
I don't know. It's hard to say, and obviously, I mean, CLG is seated ahead of Cloud9, but I don't know. I just think Cloud9 is the better team.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with the 3-0.
Okay. Anyways, should be fun. Those games are what? Are they just Saturday, Sunday,
Yeah.
regular stuff?
Saturday,
Yeah?
Sunday, and then the week after we got a banger because we got the 2 lower bracket games and the 2 upper bracket games, which will include EG and 100 Thieves. So maybe more of a boring this weekend potentially. We don't know. Could be 2 5-game bangers, but in 2 weeks' time is when we're gonna see some fireworks, hopefully.
Yeah.
Before we move
let's
on,
get into quick news.
no.
Oh, there's something else? What else?
We're making our playoff predictions, so why don't we go and revisit our regular season predictions? Because
Oh yes,
the final standings are in.
Golf clap. I would clap, but I guess that wouldn't be good for audio. But yes,
Yeah.
J&T took the victory this split. Oh boy.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, that's it? I thought it was worse than that.
No. Well, we had some.
I stopped counting once I knew that I lost
Yeah.
the Friday game.
Yeah, because you went for the big upset with Immortals over Cloud9, but I took some
could've-
spicy picks on Sunday, but I was at that point I was like 4 games ahead, so it didn't really matter.
I could have just done a bunch of swaps, I need this many games to be different. I wasn't gonna do that. I feel like that kind of defeats the purpose of doing predictions. Like you're not really doing predictions anymore at that point, right?
I get you. I wouldn't do that either.
So,
but
yeah,
I know I do swap my picks sometimes, but I don't do it with the intention, knowing that I need to catch up X amount of games.
Yeah. You remember last week how we said that we didn't count the first split that we did this?
Well, I went back maybe we did. I clicked on a random episode and I didn't see any prediction tallies, so I kind of just gave up and thought we didn't do it. So I don't know.
I went to it I went to the one episode and you said that you're like, I didn't count them, but I'm pretty sure you won, is what you said to me.
Oh, okay. So
meaning that I won.
Oh, okay. Well, what would that mean then? Because this has been the 4th.
That would mean I'm up 3-2 then. I thought it was tied because I thought we didn't do it for the first split. But I'm up 3-2 then, is what I believe.
Okay. Well, good for you then. But I'm catching back up.
You took the dub this one. I thought you were gonna have 4 or 5 games on me because I stopped counting.
No, I took a lot of upsets on Sunday, kind of to make it exciting, but it didn't really matter. So
yeah. Anyways, golf clap for you, J&T. Congrats on the dub. Okay,
Alrighty.
Now we can do quick news?
Yep. So we got some quick news. We had an individual segment on this last week, but we had a lot of stuff to talk about with the teams. But top 5 LCS mid laners, that list came out. I'm surprised they released this one before the 80 carry one, because Mid lane is pretty iconic within the LCS, but no surprise. The top three were Bjergsen, Jensen, and High. Um, four was Pobelter, and five was Power of Evil. And felt like there was people didn't really have any problem with the list whatsoever, except for Power of Evil being at number 5. And I just think that was kind of a byproduct of what I said before, with the turnover being so high within the mid lane role. Power of Evil, while he hasn't been like a super dominant player, he's been a very strong player. Don't get me wrong, but he's been in the LCS for 5 years now. Like, this was the end of his 5th year, and I feel like it's a bit hard to believe. But he got here season 8. He's been here season 8,
Yeah.
9, 10, 11, and 12, and the only other mid laners that have been playing for that long, High didn't even play that long, but Power of Evil is one of the most tenured mid laners of all time, and it's kind of hard to keep him. It's kind of hard to ignore him from that list, despite his play
For
never
sure.
really being like top tier. Because look at the other mid laners on this list. Like, at times, all these mid laners have been at the top of their respective role within the league. Power of Evil, I don't think you could say was, but like there's a reason why he's been around for 5 years. It's because he's a good mid laner.
Yeah, I could totally buy it that he's on this list. When he was with Optic, he was really, really good. His team was awful, but he was really, really good. He dragged them. Same thing with CLG, and the last time CLG was good in 2019 when they finished third. He was a monster on that team, and so he was like this guy that was known for making bad teams good.
Yeah, in FlyQuest season 10, they went to
Unfortunately,
Worlds.
he ran out of gas this year, I guess.
Yeah. Well, he had to go to
Because he
Immortals,
didn't make
so
this. Yeah, he didn't make this bad team good, but for the most part, that's what he's done since coming to the LCS. So I wasn't surprised by that. I could have seen Pobelter being ahead of High. High's a weird one because like he didn't play for that long, but like when he did play, he was like really like the High shot calling meme was like the thing that he was known for, right? So a lot of people credited High with like early LCS macro stuff, right? Like he was one of the pioneers for solid macro in North America. And so I think that's why he was put on the list. But I do think Pobelter over the course of his career actually was a little bit better. So I would have put Pobelter number 3 and High 4, but I wasn't like, oh no, this list is so bad. I think it was okay.
to me, it's been the most accurate list so far, I think. Obviously they still have 80 carry to go. I remember we talked about and gave some predictions, so we won't really get into that. But everyone, I think, knows where it's going to begin with Sneaky and Double if does 1 and 2.
Yeah, well, Double if then Sneaky.
Yes, I said it the other way
Yeah.
around. You're correct.
Yeah.
Next up, quick news: Hooney officially retired. Put out some Twitlonger, I think. He had a pretty good career. He didn't necessarily have the best of the best parts of his career weren't necessarily in North America, where he did play the longest, because he did have a great season 5 on Fnatic and a great season 7 on SKT, and even a great season 6 on Immortals. They didn't end up making Worlds, but he's obviously been one of the better top laners, and
he was a beast
in the
on
league
Immortals,
for
man. Like he was such a monster.
yeah, he was him and Reignover. Like, people for like Hooney stuck around. Like, Reignover didn't really stick around too much. He only played like another year or two after that Immortals run, but Hooney continued to play on various teams. And when everybody seemed to think that Hooney was reaching the tail end of his career, he just seemed to kind of, he seemed to, in my opinion, rejuvenated a little bit on
Going.
TSM.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I agree. I think that we saw him obviously not have the greatest year, or the greatest split, but I mean, a lot of that was in part due to wrist issues. Like when I hear someone has wrist issues, I'm not surprised at all that they're struggling, because you can't practice as much.
Yeah.
League is a game that requires repetition. With patches changing so often, your champ pool is no longer your champ pool if you don't play that champion for, I don't know, a month or so. Like, that champion is no longer a part of your pool. You need to keep up and get the reps in, and you just can't do that when you have wrist issues. And so, yeah, I'm not surprised whatsoever that we didn't see the best out of Hooney recently. But as far as his career goes, one of the greatest tops for sure.
Yep. Next up, on, I think it was Wednesday night, maybe early Thursday morning, there was a big old play over there in the LCK with Canyon probably making one of a highlight reel level Lee Sin insect kick. And I feel like, I remember I was like half asleep in bed, just like scrolling through Twitter at, I guess it would have been 3 a.m. or something, and I just like seen my whole timeline was getting spammed of people reacting to this Canyon kick. Oh my god, it is like the nastiest shit I've ever seen in my life. I don't even know what to say.
This isn't even like quick news, but it's just like, how can we not talk about this? That play was so jaw dropping. It was like, what the fuck did I just see? You can do that? Like, what? And what's so crazy to me is like, we're season, what, 12 now? And like, people are still innovating on Lee Sin. Like, people used to, like, the first time an insect happened, people were like, what the hell is that? Right? And now it's like, that's become so natural, and now we're seeing like whole new versions of it. It is crazy that even this like late, like, how long has Lee Sin been a champion for? A decade. We're
Yeah,
still
something
seeing
like
some
that.
innovation with it. That play was absolutely amazing,
Yeah,
so
and
amazing.
won them the game because it was 1-1 in the series. I forget who they were playing. Maybe it was like Kwangdong or something like that. But it was 1-1 in the series, and the kick won them the
Yeah, I think
game.
it was Kwangdong
Yeah, I
Freaks.
mean, I haven't been keeping up with the LCK as much this split, but I think Damwon is sitting. They're in fourth right now, behind DRX, T1, and Gen G. I
I haven't
think,
kept up either.
but Canyon, Canyon and Showmaker still run that shit. So I hope
Yeah,
for their sake that they're a world's team. I'll check right now, but I think
me
they're
too.
fourth. They
I'm
are.
still.
Oh, their Damwon is. Or sorry, Sandbox is third.
Mm.
But I mean, Damwon, they put up a respectable 10-8. Dude, they had Birdall as their starting top going into this split. That guy sucks ass. I mean,
Does he? I don't know.
dude, he was like the
I
sub.
haven't watched it all.
He was a sub top for Gen G, and remember Gen G subbed that guy in for Worlds, and he was
Hmm.
ass.
Yeah, yeah.
And unfortunately, their Nongshim bot lane, who they brought in from last year, hasn't been amazing by any means. That was Duckdom and the other guy's name,
Not
whatever it
panning
is,
out.
but they haven't been that great. But I mean, don't get me wrong. Like the LCK right now is just being ran by Gen G and T1, so it's not
Yeah.
really a big surprise that they're not in the top two, and they're not behind Sandbox, who's in third. So four teams make worlds for LCK. So I think Damwon will be one of those teams, and even though they're being only fourth in the LCK, like you still probably got to put Showmaker and Canyon up there and like top mid jungles in the world still.
I feel like people would have started. I still think people would have started considering Showmaker for GOAT if they would have won Worlds. They came just shy because I think two Worlds titles, and with the level of dominance that those two players have, you could definitely throw their name in the pool if they start to get more than one World Championship. But
That's
they
the
didn't,
question
so
though. Can anyone else
they
get
didn't.
any other? Can anybody else get two? That's the main question. I feel like to enter. I feel like
Yeah.
Fakers is still alone on that pedestal, and up until somebody gets two, then they can enter the conversation. I mean, it's hard to say,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the point of entry seems to be at least two titles. Get in there.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
All right, next up, some news that only came out like an hour or two ago. Astralis is reportedly considering selling their LEC slot, and based on the Upcomer article that I was reading, the interested teams are Garmin Corp,
Mm-hmm.
Navi. For people who know, might
Mm.
recognize the name Navi. They're primarily a CS:GO team, but they have played in some like Challenger series, like way back in the day in 20. I'm reading the article right now. It says 2016, and then last up, an unnamed North American team. And based off of the rumors that
It's
we were here,
TSM.
based off the rumors that we were hearing beforehand, that could likely be TSM. So I think a lot of people were under the impression that another LEC team was going to sell their spot at the end of the split, after the whole Misfits news came out. And it's no surprise that Caramine Corp is once again one of those teams that is in contention for it. To me, even if TSM is one of those teams that, or I mean, it is that North American team who's potentially interested in the spot, I feel like it's a no-brainer move to go for Caramine Corp if it makes sense both financially and I guess mainly it's just financially, but if it makes sense, I feel like that's what you have to go with. It would put Reckless back into the league, which would be pretty exciting, but also pretty much Caramine Corp is probably the only team in the world that has more fans and higher viewership than other major region teams around the world. I don't have the numbers
Yeah.
in front of my face, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if you said that Caramine Corp had more viewers than a lot of the LEC teams, a lot of the NA teams, a lot of the LPL teams, and even a lot of the LCK teams. Not obviously in terms of their own regional, fans, because obviously there's going to be more fans in Korea and China and whatnot, but just in terms of like the percentage of like fans they own within that region.
Yeah. It does seem like one of the fan favorites for them to get into the league. The only thing that's weird though is like, I don't remember who I heard say this, So sorry to whoever I'm stealing this from, but someone brought up the point of like, why would K Corp join the league if they're making bank right now, but they don't have to spend $40 million for an LEC spot?
That's true.
Which I thought was like a pretty fair point.
But are they making
Like
bank?
they have so much fandom right now.
Do we know that they're
Well, I'm
making
sure.
bank though?
Well, I'm sure they are. They have a bunch of fans. Like I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah,
Definitely, but I mean, presumably they're
because you could get
fans.
more fans.
Yeah,
Though.
exactly. But you're thinking long term, obviously, and you have to know if both for their team and in Riot's case, if that makes sense. But it to me feels like a bit of a no brainer. And like I said before, that would pretty much bring Reckless back into the league, whether it would be on Caramine Corp or if they would he would try to get bought out by another team. I definitely think there will be some teams in the LEC that will be looking for new AD carries, and even some other star players within the LEC probably going to be going to different teams. Maybe some Vitality players. Perks, Caramine Corp, Perks Reckless. I don't know. That'd be my spicy prediction of the LEC offseason. If Caramine Corp comes in, they try to go buy out Perks or they try to acquire Perks and have Perks and Reckless. Because I feel like if you had Perks and Reckless on your team, that would shoot you right up to the top in terms of like fan base, like instantly. That put you right up there with G2, I think.
Speaking of Vitality, oh my god, it was so nice watching XL beat them.
What was it like going into the last 2 weeks of the split? They had like a 95% chance to make playoffs when they were 8-5, and then they needed to win. They went 0-4 in the last week because they lost all 3 games and lost the tiebreaker.
Was just not that good, man. I'm telling you, I don't know. You know what though? They actually did start to play well towards the end, like not obviously the last week or whatever, but they were starting to look a lot better, like mid split or whatever. They looked like shit at the start of the split, and I thought that team was really bad. But I don't know. Anyways, that was great. Let's go XL. That was beast. That was huge. XL definitely started to struggle towards the end as well, but anyway. Is there anything else, J&T?
Yeah, there's one last thing. Apparently Arcane, they won like 3 Emmys for best of blank in animation or something. So once again, Arcane popping off. Give me the season 2 announcement.
Just waiting for season 2, man.
Where's the season 2 announcement?
When's it come? Well, I remember they said if season 2 were to happen, it'd be 2023. It'd be because came out in 2021. They said it would be over a year.
We're almost done 2022. Like we're
it's
2/3 of the way done that. So let's get going.
Yeah.
Announcement soon.
Yeah.
They announced Arcane in like fall of 2019, and it came out in late 2021. So,
man, you remember how hype we were for that too? And like we didn't know that it was going to be amazing. We were just like, man, I hope this is good. And then it was so good.
Yeah, if it sucked, that would have been hilarious. Kind of just from all like the hype that got built up. But
I wouldn't have laughed. I would have.
I thought it would have been funny.
Yeah. Okay, that's it though.
Yep, that's it.
Okay, that's it. Thank you guys for coming back. We've had a lot of new viewers lately, so if you guys are new, remember, hit the subscribe button. We appreciate you all. We recorded a little bit early this week, so I may have baited people last week by saying we stream at around 12:30 EST midnight, so my bad for this week. You know what though, we never plug our Twitters. I guess we have them on the stream, but whenever we're not streaming at normal time, I will tweet out, so follow us on Twitter to get those updates. If you do want to catch the live show, we stream at twitch.tv/clownfiesta podcast. You can find us on there. Yeah, playoffs, guys, get hype because I don't know, playoffs are a good time. That's going to do it for this episode. This has been episode 96 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. We'll see you guys next week.